The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Levi Xanders rode into the dusty town of McGill, Nevada, his weathered face a map of disappointments and old sorrows. The year was 1878, and at 32, Levi had already lived several lifetimes of hardship, each one etched into the lines around his eyes and the permanent furrow between his brows. His sorrel stallion, Ember, slowed to a walk as they approached the town's main street. McGill wasn't much a handful of buildings stretched along the rutted dirt road, but it was the closest thing to civilization for miles. The silver mining boom had brought life to this part of Nevada, though McGill remained modest compared to Virginia City or Carson City. Still, it had what Levi needed, a fresh start where nobody knew his name or his past. Levi's hand absently dropped to his side, feeling the familiar shape of his Colt revolver. Not that he expected trouble, but 10 years riding as a Texas Ranger had taught him caution. Those days were behind him now. He had come to Nevada to start over, to build something that might last, if only his body would cooperate. The memory of the doctor's words in El Paso still stung. "The fever that nearly killed you took something else, Mr. Xanders. I'm afraid you'll never father children." Levi dismounted outside the town's only saloon, the Silver Spur, and secured Ember to the hitching post. He didn't particularly want a drink, but saloons were where information flowed, and he needed to learn about available work. His savings wouldn't last forever. The saloon was surprisingly busy for a Tuesday afternoon. Miners, cowboys, and locals crowded around small tables. A piano player in the corner hammered out a cheerful tune that seemed at odds with the somber faces of the gamblers. Levi made his way to the bar, ordered a whiskey, and listened. "Widow woman out at the old Peterson place," a grizzled miner was saying. "Took over after her husband died in that cave in last winter. Got herself 5 little ones and trying to run that ranch all on her own." His companion grunted. Delaney Peterson, stubborn as they come, turned down 3 marriage proposals already, says she ain't looking for another husband, just hired hands, 5 children and a ranch, the first miner chuckled. Woman's got more grit than sense. Levi sipped his whiskey, the liquid burning a path down his throat, a widow with 5 children trying to run a ranch alone. The thought stirred something inside him, not pity exactly, respect perhaps, and curiosity. This Peterson place, Levi found himself asking, turning to the miners. "How far out of town?" "About 5 miles northwest," the older miner answered, eyeing Levi with sudden interest. "You looking for work, stranger?" "Might be." "Well, she pays fair from what I hear, but she works a man harder than most, and those kids of hers." He shook his head. "Handful don't begin to describe it." Levi nodded his thanks and finished his drink. He had planned to take a room at the boarding house, rest for a day or two before deciding his next move, but something about the widow's situation tugged at him. 5 miles wasn't far. He could at least ride out, see if she needed help. What else did he have to do? The Peterson ranch came into view just as the last light was fading from the sky. It was larger than Levi had expected, a substantial 2-story house, a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. Once it had clearly been a prosperous operation. Now, though, signs of neglect were evident. The corral fence needed mending, the barn roof had missing shingles, and weeds had overtaken parts of what should have been cultivated land. As Levi approached, he noticed a small figure struggling with a water pump. Drawing closer, he realized it was a boy of perhaps 8 or 9 trying to fill a bucket that seemed almost as big as he was. "Evening," Levi called, not wanting to startle the child. "Is your ma around?" The boy looked up, suspicion immediately clouding his features. "Who's asking?" Levi had to bite back a smile at the protective stance the youngster took. "Name's Levi Xanders. Heard in town your ma might be looking for help around the ranch." Before the boy could answer, the front door of the house banged open and a woman stepped onto the porch, a shotgun held confidently in her hands. "That's far enough, mister," she called out, her voice firm but not frightened. "State your business." Levi raised his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "Like I told the boy, madam, name's Levi Xanders. I'm looking for work, heard you might be hiring." She studied him for a long moment, the shotgun never wavering. She was younger than he'd expected, probably not yet 30, with rich auburn hair pulled back from a face that would have been beautiful if it weren't so tired and drawn with worry. Despite that, there was a dignity about her that commanded respect. "It's nearly dark," she finally said. "Not the usual time for job inquiries." "No, madam, I just arrived in town and heard about your situation. Thought I'd ride out while there was still light." Another pause as she considered. "Ethan," she said to the boy, "go finish your chores. I'll talk to Mr. Xanders." The boy Ethan shot Levi another suspicious look before reluctantly moving off toward the barn, dragging his water bucket. "I'm Delaney Peterson," the woman said, finally lowering the shotgun slightly. "And I don't have a situation, Mr. Xanders. I have a ranch to run and 5 children to raise." "Yes, madam, and I'm looking for honest work." "What experience do you have with ranching?" Grew up on one in Texas. "Worked cattle until I was 20, then spent 10 years as a ranger." Something flickered in her eyes at the mention of his former profession. A Texas Ranger. "What brings you to Nevada?" Levi shifted in his saddle, looking for a change, something quieter. Delaney seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. "I need help with the cattle, fixing fences, and general maintenance. The pay isn't much, room, board, and $30 a month is all I can offer." "That's fair." She appeared slightly surprised that he'd accepted so readily. "You haven't seen what needs doing yet." Levi glanced around at the ranch. "I've got a pretty good idea, Mrs. Peterson. And $30 a month is fair for what you're asking." A small, tired smile touched her lips. "Well then, Mr. Xanders, you can stable your horse in the barn. There's a room above it where the ranch hands stay." She paused. "We eat breakfast at 5. Don't be late if you want to eat." With that, she turned and went back into the house, leaving Levi to wonder what exactly he'd gotten himself into. The first glimmers of dawn had barely touched the eastern sky when Levi made his way from the barn to the main house. He'd spent a restless night on the narrow cot in the small, dusty room above the barn. Not because the accommodations were uncomfortable, he'd slept in far worse places during his ranger days, but because his mind wouldn't quiet. Taking this job had been impulsive, something he rarely did. Yet here he was. Light spilled from the kitchen windows of the main house, and as Levi approached, he could hear the sounds of activity inside, children's voices, the clatter of dishes, and occasionally Delaney's voice rising above the din, giving instructions. He hesitated at the back door, suddenly unsure of his welcome in this family domain, but before he could knock, the door swung open. A girl of about 12 stood there, her auburn hair so like her mother's tied back in a neat braid. She had her mother's green eyes too, but they held none of Delaney's wariness. Instead, they sparkled with curiosity. "You're the new ranch hand," she stated matter-of-factly. "I'm Sarah, the oldest. Ma says to come in for breakfast." Levi removed his hat and followed her into the warm, busy kitchen. It was a large room dominated by a scarred wooden table where 4 children already sat, Ethan from yesterday. 2 younger boys who looked to be twins of about 6, and a little girl no more than 4, perched on a stack of books to reach her plate. Delaney stood at the stove, her back to him, flipping flapjacks with practiced ease. She wore a simple blue dress covered by an apron, her hair twisted into a knot at the nape of her neck. Several strands had already escaped, softening the severe hairstyle. "Mr. Xanders," she greeted without turning around. "Have a seat. Coffee's on the table." Levi sat in the empty chair indicated by Sarah, feeling oddly like an intruder in this family tableau. The 2 twins stared at him openly, while the little girl seemed more interested in mashing her flapjacks into a syrupy mess. "These are my children," Delaney said, finally turning and placing a stack of flapjacks in the center of the table. "You met Ethan yesterday and Sarah just now. The twins are James and Joseph, and the little one is Grace. Pleased to meet you all," Levi said, inclining his head to each child. "Are you really a Texas Ranger?" One of the twins asked Joseph or James. Levi couldn't tell them apart yet. "I was," Levi replied, accepting the coffee Sarah poured for him. "Did you shoot bad guys?" the other twin asked, eyes wide. "James," Delaney admonished gently, "that's not appropriate breakfast conversation." "But Ma, no buts. Eat your breakfast. You have school today." The mention of school caused a chorus of groans from all except Sarah, who just rolled her eyes at her siblings' dramatics. As they ate, Levi observed the family dynamics. Despite their obvious financial struggles and the absence of their father, there was genuine warmth in the Peterson household. The children bickered and teased, but underneath it was clear they cared for one another. And Delaney, though strict when needed, spoke to her children with respect, listening to their thoughts and concerns. It was nice. And more than a little painful to watch, knowing he would never have this for himself. After breakfast, the older children helped clear the table, then grabbed their books and lunch pails. "Sarah, make sure your brothers actually go into the schoolhouse this time," Delaney instructed as she wiped Grace's sticky face with a damp cloth. "And Ethan, no more fights with Billy Lawson, you hear me?" "But Ma," he said, "I don't care what he said. You solve problems with words, not fists." Ethan scowled but nodded. The children filed out, Sarah herding her younger brothers along, their chatter fading as they headed down the path toward town. Once they were gone, Delaney turned to Levi, her demeanor shifting subtly from mother to ranch owner. "Grace stays with me," she explained, setting the little girl up with some toys in the corner of the kitchen. "She's still too young for school. Now, Mr. Xanders, let me show you what needs doing around here." The tour of the ranch revealed exactly how much work lay ahead. The cattle herd, about 60 head, was healthy enough, but had scattered across the range without proper management. Fences were down in several places, the barn needed extensive repairs, and the southern pasture's irrigation system had failed completely. It was a daunting amount of work for one man, let alone a widow also trying to raise 5 children. "How have you managed all this?" Levi asked as they walked back toward the main buildings, Grace trotting along beside her mother, occasionally stopping to examine interesting pebbles or wildflowers. Delaney's chin lifted slightly. "We do what needs doing, Mr. Xanders. The older children help when they're not in school. I've hired day workers when I could afford it, and some things." She gestured toward the dilapidated south barn. "Some things just have to wait." Levi nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying. She was prioritizing, keeping the essential operations running, letting the rest go. It was a practical approach, but not sustainable long term. "I'll start with the north pasture fence," he decided. "Get the herd contained where they should be, then work on the irrigation. The barn roof can wait until those are done." "That makes sense," she agreed. "I've got tools in the shed and there's lumber behind the barn that my husband cut before." She trailed off, then cleared her throat. "Before the accident," Levi pretended not to notice the momentary break in her composure. "I'll get started then." As he turned to go, Delaney called after him. "Mr. Xanders," he looked back, "thank you for taking the job, I mean. Not many men want to work for a woman, especially one with 5 children underfoot." There was a vulnerability in her eyes that she quickly masked, but Levi had seen it, a brief glimpse of the fear and uncertainty she must live with daily. "It's good, honest work, Mrs. Peterson," he replied simply. "And that's all I'm looking for." The days fell into a rhythm. Levi rose before dawn, joined the family for breakfast, then worked until sundown. The north pasture fence took 3 days to repair properly. Rounding up the scattered cattle took another 2. By the end of his first week, the most critical issues were addressed, and he could turn his attention to the irrigation system. Each evening, he joined the family for dinner, initially feeling like an outsider but gradually becoming more comfortable with the children's curious questions and Delaney's quiet appreciation of his efforts. After dinner, while Delaney put the younger children to bed, Levi often sat on the porch with Ethan, teaching the boy how to clean a rifle or sharing sanitized stories from his ranger days. It was during one such evening, about 2 weeks after his arrival, that Ethan finally asked the question Levi had been dreading. "How come you don't have a family of your own, Mr. Xanders?" Levi's hands stilled on the saddle he was oiling. The boy watched him with innocent curiosity, unaware of how the question pierced. "Never found the right time, I guess," Levi answered, the lie tasting bitter. "Pa always said a man ain't complete without a family," Ethan continued, oblivious to Levi's discomfort. Said it's what gives a man purpose. Levi swallowed hard. Your pa sounds like he was a wise man. He was, Ethan said proudly. Then, his voice dropping, I miss him. I imagine you do, Levi said softly. It's hard losing someone you love. Ethan nodded, looking down at his hands. Ma tries to be both our ma and pa now, but sometimes I think she's awful lonely. The observation, so astute from one so young, caught Levi off guard. Before he could respond, the screen door opened and Delaney stepped onto the porch. Ethan, time for bed, she said, then noticed her son's solemn expression. Everything all right? Yes, madam, both Ethan and Levi answered simultaneously, causing the boy to grin. As Ethan disappeared inside, Delaney lingered on the porch. The night was warm, the stars brilliant overhead. Crickets chirped in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. He's taken quite a shine to you, Delaney observed, nodding toward the door where Ethan had gone. He's a good boy, Levi replied. Smart, too. You've done well with him, with all of them. Delaney sighed, leaning against the porch railing. I try, but sometimes I wonder if it's enough. They need a father figure. They had one, Levi pointed out. From what I can tell, your husband left them with good memories and solid values. That counts for a lot. She looked at him then, really looked at him, her green eyes searching his face. Thomas was a good man, a good father when he died. She shook her head. Well, the children weren't the only ones who lost something irreplaceable. The admission hung in the air between them, more intimate than anything she'd shared before. Levi felt a sudden, irrational urge to reach out to offer comfort. Instead, he remained still, respecting the invisible boundary between employer and employee. Loss has a way of reshaping us, he finally said, making us stronger in some ways, vulnerable in others. You speak from experience. It wasn't a question, but Levi answered anyway. Yes, she didn't press, and he was grateful. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the night wrapping around them like a comfortable blanket. I should get some sleep, Delaney eventually said, straightening. Tomorrow's wash day, and those sheets won't scrub themselves. Good night, Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Xanders. She paused, one hand on the door. My friends call me Delaney. With that, she slipped inside, leaving Levi alone with the stars and a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. The weeks passed, and summer settled fully over the Nevada landscape. Under Levi's careful attention, the Peterson ranch slowly transformed. The irrigation system in the southern pasture was repaired, allowing the dormant grass to flourish once more. The barn roof no longer leaked, and the herd was contained and properly managed, growing fat on the rich grass. More subtle was the transformation within the household. The constant worry that had lined Delaney's face began to ease. The children, especially Ethan, flourished under Levi's quiet mentorship. Even little Grace, initially shy around the tall stranger, now regularly sought him out, offering wildflower bouquets or interesting rocks she'd found. Levi knew he should move on. His original plan had been to work for a month or two, then continue west to California. But each time he thought about leaving, something held him back. He told himself it was the unfinished work. The west barn still needed rebuilding, the chicken coop needed expanding, the root cellar required reinforcement before winter. But in his heart, he knew it was more than that. It was the way Sarah sought his opinion on her essays for school, the way the twins, James and Joseph, begged him for horseback riding lessons. The way Ethan's shoulders had straightened, pride replacing the burden of being the man of the house at too young an age, and it was Delaney. The way she hummed while kneading bread dough. The way she laughed a rare, precious sound when he told stories of his more ridiculous ranger escapades. The way she looked in the evening light, copper highlights gleaming in her auburn hair. He was falling in love with her. With all of them, really, this ready-made family that had somehow wormed their way into his heart when he wasn't looking, and it terrified him. Because what could he offer Delaney Peterson? A man who could never give her more children. A man with a violent past and nightmares that sometimes woke him shouting in the dark. A man who had spent his adult life wandering, never putting down roots. So he threw himself into his work, rising earlier, working later, trying to exhaust himself so thoroughly that these dangerous feelings would subside. But they didn't. If anything, they grew stronger. It all came to a head one scorching August afternoon. Levi was repairing the chicken coop when he heard screams from the direction of the creek that ran along the property's eastern edge. Children's screams, the twins. Without thinking, he dropped his tools and ran, hand automatically going to the revolver he still wore out of habit. He reached the creek bank to find a scene of chaos. Joseph was in the water, being swept downstream by the current, unusually strong after recent mountain rains. James was running along the bank, screaming his twin's name. And there was Delaney, already waist-deep in the rushing water, fighting against the current to reach her son. Levi didn't hesitate. He sprinted downstream, calculating where the current would carry the boy. The creek bent sharply around a large boulder about 50 yards ahead if Joseph hit that at the wrong angle. Levi ran faster than he thought possible, reaching the bend just as Joseph's small body was swept around it. Plunging into the water, Levi braced himself against the current, arms outstretched. The impact when Joseph slammed into him nearly knocked him off his feet, but he maintained his grip, lifting the sputtering, terrified child to safety. "I've got you," he reassured the boy, who was coughing and crying. "You're safe now." He carried Joseph to the bank just as Delaney arrived, her skirt soaked, her face a mask of terror that melted into relief when she saw her son in Levi's arms. Joseph. She reached for him, and Levi transferred the boy to her embrace. She held him tightly, murmuring soothing words into his wet hair, then looked up at Levi with tears in her eyes. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." James arrived a moment later, throwing himself at his twin and their mother, creating a tangle of wet, relieved Petersons. Levi stood back, suddenly feeling like an intruder on this family moment, despite having just saved a vital part of it. Later, after Joseph had been dried, checked for injuries, none, thankfully, and put to bed for rest, Delaney found Levi in the barn, brushing down Ember with more vigor than necessary. "The boys were trying to build a dam," she explained, her voice still shaky. "They didn't realize how strong the current was if you hadn't been here." "But I was," Levi said simply, not looking at her, continuing his methodical brushing. "Levi." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it stopped him in his tracks. "Look at me, please." He turned slowly, the brush still in his hand. Delaney stood just inside the barn door, her hair damp and coming loose from its pins, her dress changed but still rumpled. She had never looked more beautiful to him. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "There's no need." Anyone would have done the same. No, not anyone would have known what to do or been fast enough or strong enough. She took a step closer. "You saved my son's life today." Levi swallowed hard, uncomfortable with her gratitude, with the intensity in her eyes. "Delaney, why did you really come here, Levi?" she interrupted. "To McGill, I mean. A former Texas Ranger could find better work than ranch hand for a struggling widow." The question caught him off guard. "I told you I wanted something quieter, is that all?" "Because sometimes I catch you looking at the children, at all of us, with such longing. Like we're something you've lost, or something you never had." Her perception cut too close to the bone. Levi turned away, placing the brush carefully on a shelf, buying time to compose himself. "I think you're imagining things, Mrs. Peterson. Back to Mrs. Peterson now." Her voice had a hint of hurt in it. "I thought we were friends, at least." "We are," he said quickly, turning back. "Of course we are." "Then be honest with me, please." The plea in her voice undid him. Before he could think better of it, the truth came spilling out. "I can't have children," he said bluntly. "There was a fever years ago. The doctor said it left me sterile." The word tasted like failure in his mouth. "I left Texas because I couldn't bear to see the pity in people's eyes when they learned the Xanders line would end with me. I came west thinking I'd start fresh, build a life that didn't revolve around what I couldn't have." He gave a bitter laugh. "And then I end up here, surrounded by a family that reminds me every day of what I'll never have." The silence that followed his confession was deafening. Levi couldn't bear to look at Delaney to see the pity or disgust that must be on her face. "Levi," she finally said, her voice gentle. Look at me." Reluctantly, he raised his eyes to hers. There was no pity there, only understanding and something else, something warm that made his heart stutter. "I have 5 children," she said. 5 beautiful, wonderful, exhausting children who need a father far more than I need another child." The meaning behind her words took a moment to register. When it did, Levi felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. "Delaney, you don't know what you're saying. I'm not. I know exactly what I'm saying." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint freckles across her nose, smell the lavender soap she used. "I've watched you these past months. You're kind, patient, and strong. You've brought this ranch back to life. More importantly, you've brought laughter back to my children. To me." "I'm not a good man," Levi protested weakly. "The things I've done as a ranger were your duty," she finished for him. "And they're in the past. I'm talking about the future, our future if you want it." Her words hung in the air between them, an offer so tempting that Levi could barely breathe for wanting it. A family. A home. "Delaney, I should think on this," he finally managed. "It's not a decision to make in haste." Disappointment flickered across her face, but she nodded. "Of course." "Take all the time you need." She turned to go, but Levi caught her hand, unable to let her leave, thinking he was rejecting her. "Delaney, wait, I'm not saying no, I need to be sure this is right for all of you. The children adore you," she said softly. "And I." She paused, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "I have grown to care for you deeply, Levi Xanders." The confession, so simply stated, broke something open inside him. Before he could second-guess himself, Levi drew her closer and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. For a heart-stopping moment, she was still in his arms. Then she was kissing him back, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders, her body softening against his. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and longing pouring into the connection between them. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily, eyes wide with wonder and newfound possibility. "I need to think," Levi repeated, though his resolve was rapidly crumbling. "But know this, Delaney Peterson, I have grown to care for you too, more than I thought possible." Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then think, Levi, and know that when you're ready, we'll be here." She slipped from his arms and out of the barn, leaving Levi to wonder if he'd just been offered everything he'd ever wanted and if he was brave enough to take it. That night, Levi didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his cot in the room above the barn, turning his options over in his mind. Leaving would be the safest choice. Pack his meager belongings, ride out before dawn, spare himself the pain of deeper attachment, but the very thought made his chest ache. The Peterson Ranch had become more of a home to him in a few months than anywhere had been since his childhood in Texas. And Delaney. The memory of her kiss, the softness of her lips, the way she'd melted against him, made his blood run hot. Could he really do this? Become a father to 5 children who had already lost one father. Become a husband to a woman who deserved better than a broken ex-ranger with nightmares and scars. As the first rays of dawn crept through his window, Levi came to a decision. He would stay. He would try. Because the alternative, walking away from this chance at happiness, was unthinkable. He made his way to the main house as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, earlier than usual for breakfast. To his surprise, Delaney was already in the kitchen, alone, kneading dough with quick, efficient movements. She looked up when he entered, and the hope and wariness in her eyes nearly undid him. "Levi," she said softly, "you're early." "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, removing his hat and holding it awkwardly in his hands. "Been thinking all night." And the single word held such vulnerability that Levi crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, taking the dough-covered hands in his own. "And I want to stay, Delaney. If you'll have me, if the children will have me, I want to be part of this family." The smile that broke across her face was like watching the sun emerge from behind storm clouds, brilliant and life-giving. "The children will be overjoyed," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I." "Oh, Levi, I was so afraid you'd decide to leave." "Not a chance," he murmured, drawing her closer. "Not now that I've found you." He hesitated, then added, "But I need to be sure you understand what you're getting. I'll never be able to give you more children. In my past, there are men who might still hold grudges from my ranger days." I have 5 children, Levi. My family is complete. She squeezed his hands. And as for your past, we all have one. What matters is our future. He kissed her then, a promise and a covenant. She tasted of cinnamon and hope, and Levi knew he was home. They agreed to tell the children that evening. The day passed in a blur for Levi, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. He finished the chicken coop repair in record time, checked the cattle, and even managed to fix the loose board on the front porch steps, a small thing that Delaney had mentioned bothered her. When the children returned from school, they sensed something different immediately. Sarah gave him knowing looks. Ethan was unusually quiet, and even the twins seemed to pick up on the charged atmosphere, their normal boisterousness subdued. After dinner, with the dishes cleared and the kitchen put to rights, Delaney gathered everyone in the sitting room. Grace climbed immediately into Levi's lap, a habit she'd developed in recent weeks, and he felt his heart swell with affection for the little girl. "Children," Delaney began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mr. Xanders, Levi and I have something important to discuss with you." 5 pairs of eyes fixed on them with varying degrees of curiosity and understanding. "As you know, Levi has been a tremendous help to us these past months. The ranch is doing better than it has since before your father passed." She took a deep breath. "Levi and I have grown close. We've developed feelings for each other." "Are you getting married?" Sarah asked bluntly, always the direct one. Delaney flushed. "Well, that's what we wanted to talk to you about. We're considering it, but only if all of you are comfortable with the idea. This affects all of us and your feelings matter." Silence fell over the room as the children processed this information. Levi held his breath, acutely aware of the small, warm weight of Grace in his arms. "Would you be our pa?" Ethan finally asked, his young face serious. Levi swallowed hard. "I would be honored to be your stepfather, Ethan. I know I could never replace your real father, but I would try my best to be a good father to all of you." "Would we have to call you Pa?" one of the twins, James, asked. "You could call me whatever you're comfortable with," Levi assured him. "Levi is fine, or Mr. Xanders, or whatever feels right to you." "I think it's a splendid idea," Sarah declared, always the first to adapt. "The ranch needs a man's touch, and Ma's been much happier since you came." Delaney's cheeks colored at her daughter's frank assessment, but she didn't deny it. "Do we get a vote?" Joseph asked. "Yes," Delaney said firmly. "Everyone gets a vote. This is a family decision." "I vote yes," Sarah said immediately. "Me too," Ethan added, his eyes fixed on Levi with an intensity that suggested he'd been hoping for this outcome for some time. The twins exchanged glances, having one of their silent conversations. "Yes, from both of us," James finally announced. All eyes turned to little Grace, still perched on Levi's knee. "What about you, Gracie?" Delaney asked gently. "Would you like Levi to stay and be part of our family?" Grace looked up at Levi with solemn blue eyes, then nodded decisively. "Stay," she said, patting his cheek with a small hand. "Levi, stay." The tightness in Levi's chest released in a rush of emotion. He hugged Grace close, then looked at Delaney, whose eyes shimmered with unshed tears of happiness. "Well," she said, her voice wavering slightly, "it seems we have our answer." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in McGill. The entire town turned out for the event. A widow remarrying was significant news in a place as small as McGill. The children stood proudly with them, Sarah as Delaney's maid of honor, Ethan as Levi's best man, the twins as ring bearers, and little Grace as flower girl. Delaney was radiant in a simple ivory dress, her auburn hair adorned with wildflowers Sarah had gathered that morning. Levi, wearing the only suit he owned, felt a swell of pride and disbelief as she walked toward him, soon to be his wife. The vows were traditional but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Levi kissed his bride to the cheers and applause of their neighbors and friends, he felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was where he belonged. These people were his family now. The celebrations continued at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and drink, musicians playing lively tunes, and children running wild with excitement. As the afternoon wore on, Levi found himself standing slightly apart, watching his new family interact with their guests. Ethan was proudly showing off his roping skills to some of the local boys. Sarah was deep in conversation with the schoolteacher. The twins were engaged in what appeared to be a cake-eating contest, and Grace was falling asleep in Delaney's arms, overwhelmed by the day's excitement. "Quite a change from the Lone Ranger, eh?" a voice said beside him. It was Doc Wilson, the town's elderly physician. "The best kind of change," Levi replied honestly. The doctor nodded sagely. "You know, when you first came to town asking about that old injury of yours, wondering if the diagnosis you got in Texas was correct, I thought you were just another drifter passing through." Levi remembered the conversation. One of his first stops in McGill had been the doctor's office, still harboring a faint hope that the El Paso doctor had been wrong. "You were right to confirm it," Levi said. "Better to know the truth than live with false hope." "Sometimes, though," Doc Wilson mused, watching as Delaney carefully transferred the sleeping Grace to Sarah's arms, "life has a way of giving us exactly what we need, even if it's not what we thought we wanted." Levi couldn't argue with that. He'd wanted his own flesh and blood, a son to carry on his name. Instead, he'd been given 5 remarkable children to love and a woman who saw past his limitations to the man beneath. "You planning to change their names?" the doctor asked. "To Xanders, I mean." The question gave Levi pause. He hadn't considered it, assuming the children would keep their father's name. "I don't know," he admitted. "That would be up to them, I suppose, and Delaney." As if summoned by her name, his wife appeared at his side, slipping her arm through his with the easy familiarity of long-time lovers, though they'd only just begun their journey together. "What are you two plotting over here?" she teased. "Just contemplating the mysteries of life, Mrs. Xanders," Doc Wilson replied with a wink before excusing himself to refill his punch glass. "Mrs. Xanders," Delaney repeated softly, testing the name on her tongue. "I like the sound of that." Levi looked down at her, still somewhat amazed that this extraordinary woman had chosen him. "I was just wondering about the children's names. Do you think they should become Xanders as well?" Delaney considered for a moment. "Perhaps we should ask them. Sarah and Ethan are old enough to have an opinion. The younger ones might not care as much now, but it would mean something to them later." "And you, how do you feel about it?" She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thomas would want them to be happy. If taking your name would make them feel more like a family, he would approve." The mention of her first husband didn't sting as Levi might have expected. Thomas Peterson had been a good man who had loved his family. Levi had no desire to erase his memory, only to build upon the foundation he had laid. "We don't have to decide today," Levi said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We have time." And that was perhaps the greatest gift of all time. Time to build a life together, to watch these children grow, to create a legacy that had nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with love. The autumn and winter passed in a blur of domesticity and hard work. Levi and Delaney settled into married life with surprising ease, as though they'd been partners for years, rather than months. The children adjusted to their new family structure with varying degrees of adaptation. Sarah and Grace accepted Levi immediately and completely. Ethan was more reserved, still protective of his mother and his father's memory, but gradually warming to Levi's steady presence. The twins alternated between testing boundaries and seeking approval, which Levi handled with patience and consistency. The ranch flourished under their combined care. Levi's experience and Delaney's knowledge of the land created a powerful partnership. They expanded the cattle herd, repaired all the outbuildings, and even hired 2 additional hands to help with the increased workload. By spring, the Peterson-Xanders Ranch, as it was now known locally, was one of the most productive in the county. More importantly, it was a happy home filled with laughter and love. It was on a warm day in May, nearly a year after Levi had first ridden into McGill, that their lives changed yet again. Delaney had been feeling unwell for several days, experiencing bouts of nausea and unusual fatigue. Initially, she dismissed it as a passing illness, but when the symptoms persisted, Levi insisted she see Doc Wilson. Levi waited anxiously in the doctor's outer office while Delaney was examined. When she finally emerged, her face was pale and her eyes wide with shock. "What is it?" Levi asked, immediately at her side. "What's wrong?" Delaney shook her head, seemingly unable to speak. Doc Wilson appeared behind her, a bemused smile on his weathered face. "Your wife is in perfect health, Mr. Xanders," he said, "though she might be a bit tired for the next several months." "It's perfectly normal in her condition." "Condition?" Levi repeated, looking between the doctor and his wife. "What condition?" "I'm with child, Levi," Delaney finally whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "We're going to have a baby." The world seemed to stop. Levi stared at Delaney, uncomprehending. I can't." "Apparently you can," Doc Wilson interjected with a chuckle. "I've seen it before. Sometimes those doctors down in Texas are too quick to make pronouncements, or sometimes the body heals in ways we don't understand. Either way, Mrs. Xanders is most definitely expecting, and from my calculations, the baby should arrive around November." Levi felt light-headed, gripping the back of a chair for support. "A baby, our baby," Delaney nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Our baby." The impossibility of it struck him anew. He had accepted his infertility, made peace with it, found happiness despite it. And now, this miracle for it could be nothing else had been dropped into their lives. "How do you feel about this?" he asked Delaney as they rode home, her seated beside him on the wagon bench, their shoulders touching. She was quiet for a moment, one hand resting lightly on her still flat stomach. "Shocked," she admitted. "I truly never expected. I thought our family was complete." She looked up at him, a smile spreading across her face. "But I find I'm also joyful. A child that is part you, part me. It feels right, somehow. Like the final piece of a puzzle I didn't know was missing. And the children, how do you think they'll react? They'll be thrilled, I think. Even Sarah, who's getting to an age where she might resent a new baby, has such a nurturing spirit. She'll probably appoint herself assistant mother on the spot." Levi laughed, the sound slightly shaky with lingering disbelief. "And you, 6 children is a lot, Delaney." "6 children with a loving father and a happy home is a blessing," she corrected gently. "Besides, we can afford the help now. The ranch is doing well." Levi nodded, his mind still reeling. As they approached the ranch, he suddenly pulled the wagon to a halt. "Levi, what's wrong?" He turned to her, taking her hands in his. "Nothing's wrong. Everything is perfect. I just want to tell you before we're surrounded by children and questions and excitement that I love you, Delaney Xanders, more than I ever thought possible to love another person. And while I would have been completely content with our family exactly as it was, this child." His voice caught, and he had to take a moment to compose himself. "This child feels like a gift I never dared hope for." Delaney's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Levi, I love you too so much." She leaned forward and kissed him softly, a promise of all the years to come. "Now, let's go tell our children they're getting a new brother or sister." The news was met with exactly the reaction Delaney had predicted. Sarah immediately began making plans for the baby's arrival, offering to move in with Grace to make room for a nursery. Ethan tried to appear nonchalant, but couldn't hide his excited grin. The twins had 1,000 questions about where babies came from, most of which Levi and Delaney artfully deflected. And little Grace, now 5, simply patted Delaney's stomach and said, "Baby brother," with such conviction that no one dared contradict her. As Delaney's pregnancy progressed through the summer and into fall, the entire family rallied around her. Levi was attentive almost to the point of hovering, which Delaney tolerated with good-natured teasing. Sarah took over more of the household duties, proving herself remarkably capable for a girl of 13. Ethan stepped up his help with the ranch work, proud to be trusted with more responsibility. Even the twins and Grace tried to be less rowdy, though their success was limited by their natural exuberance. The baby was due in early November, but as anyone familiar with babies knew, they rarely arrived exactly on schedule. So it was that on a cold, clear night in late October, Delaney shook Levi awake with a gasp of pain. "It's time," she whispered, her face tight with discomfort. "The baby's coming." Levi was instantly alert, years of ranger training making him quick to respond in a crisis. Within minutes, he had Sarah up and helping Delaney, sent Ethan to fetch Doc Wilson from town, and arranged for the younger children to stay with their nearest neighbors. The labor was long and difficult. Levi paced outside the bedroom door, banished by Doc Wilson after his anxiety had become more hindrance than help. Sarah moved efficiently between the bedroom and the kitchen, fetching fresh water, clean linens, whatever the doctor needed. As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, Delaney's cries reached a crescendo, then suddenly stopped. In the silence that followed, Levi held his breath, his heart pounding in his ears. Then he heard a thin, indignant wail, the sound of new life entering the world. The bedroom door opened and Doc Wilson emerged, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a tired smile on his face. "Congratulations, Mr. Xanders, you have a son, a strong, healthy boy." Levi felt his knees weaken. "And Delaney, tired, as you'd expect, but doing well. Go on in, they're waiting for you." Entering the bedroom felt like stepping into a different world. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of life, sweat, blood, and something indefinably new. Delaney lay propped against pillows, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion but radiant with joy. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as he approached, her smile widening. "Come meet your son, Levi." Levi sat carefully on the edge of the bed, hardly daring to breathe as Delaney tilted the bundle toward him. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, his eyes tightly shut, a wisp of dark hair Levi's coloring plastered to his tiny head. "He's perfect," Levi whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek. The skin was impossibly soft, like nothing he'd ever felt before. "Would you like to hold him?" Levi nodded, suddenly speechless with emotion. Delaney carefully transferred the newborn into his arms, showing him how to support the head. The weight of his son was both heavier and lighter than he'd imagined, substantial yet so fragile. "Hello, little one," Levi murmured, his voice thick. "I'm your pa." The baby's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice, unfocused blue eyes seeming to look directly into Levi's soul. In that moment, something shifted fundamentally within him, a fierce, protective love unlike anything he'd ever experienced. "What shall we name him?" Delaney asked softly. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but hadn't settled on one. Now, looking at his son's face, Levi knew. "Thomas," he said, "Thomas Levi Xanders, to honor the man who gave these children life and the new life we've built together." Tears welled in Delaney's eyes. "Thomas," she repeated. "Yes, that's perfect." There was a soft knock at the door and Sarah peeked in. "Can we see the baby now?" The others are back from the neighbors and practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. Delaney laughed softly. "Yes, bring them in, quietly though. Your brother is just getting acquainted with his pa." Within moments, the room was filled with children, all trying to get the best view of their new sibling. Grace's prediction had been correct, it was indeed a baby brother. She looked quite pleased with herself as she stood on tiptoe to peer at the infant in Levi's arms. "This is Thomas," Levi told them. "Thomas Levi Xanders, your new brother. He's so small," Ethan observed, looking slightly concerned. "Was I that small?" "All babies start small," Delaney assured him, "but they grow quickly. You'll be teaching him to rope calves before you know it." The thought clearly appealed to Ethan, whose chest puffed slightly with the responsibility. "Can I hold him?" Sarah asked. Levi carefully passed Thomas to his oldest sister, who cradled him with natural ease. "Hello, Thomas," she cooed. "I'm your big sister, Sarah. I've been waiting for you." As the baby was passed carefully from sibling to sibling with plenty of adult supervision, Levi moved to sit beside Delaney, taking her hand in his. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for this family, for believing in me." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for staying, for loving us all." Looking around at his family, all 7 of them now, Levi felt a completeness he had never imagined possible. The infertile cowboy and the widow with 5 children had found what neither thought possible: a new beginning, a second chance at happiness, and a love that defied all odds. Outside, the sun rose fully over the Nevada mountains, bathing the Peterson Xanders ranch in golden light. Inside, a family that had been forged through loss, courage, and love welcomed its newest member, their hearts full of hope for all the tomorrows yet to come. 5 years later, the Peterson Xanders Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in eastern Nevada. The original herd of 60 cattle had grown to over 300. The old, neglected buildings had been repaired, replaced, or expanded. New fields had been cleared and planted. And the family that ran it all had grown in more ways than one. Thomas, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, had been joined by a sister, Hannah Rose, born 2 years after him. Where Thomas was thoughtful and observant, Hannah was bold and fearless, a combination that kept her parents constantly on their toes. The older children had flourished as well. Sarah, now 18, had recently accepted a teaching position at the McGill schoolhouse, her natural intelligence and nurturing nature making her perfect for the role. Ethan, 16, had become Levi's right hand on the ranch, showing a remarkable aptitude for animal husbandry and business. The twins, James and Joseph, 13 now and as inseparable as ever, were the family inventors, always tinkering with machinery and developing innovative, if sometimes alarming, solutions to ranch problems. And Grace, 10, had revealed an extraordinary talent for music, her singing voice so pure and true that people came from neighboring towns to hear her perform at church on Sundays. It was on a warm June evening that the family gathered on the expanded front porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the western sky in hues of orange and purple. The day's work was done, the younger children bathed and in clean clothes, the older ones relaxed after their various responsibilities. Levi sat in the porch swing, Delaney beside him, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. "Pa," Thomas called from where he was playing with wooden horses Levi had carved for him, "tell the story again." "Which story is that, son?" Levi asked, though he knew exactly which one the boy meant. "The one about how you and Ma found each other," Thomas replied, abandoning his toys to climb into his father's lap. Hannah, not to be outdone, scrambled up beside her mother. "Again," Levi pretended to groan, "you've heard it 100 times." "But it's the best story," Grace said from her perch on the porch railing where she was braiding Sarah's hair. "Because it's about us." The other children murmured their agreement, even Ethan, who usually tried to appear too mature for such family sentimentality. Levi looked at Delaney, who smiled and nodded. "Well," he began, his deep voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller, "once upon a time there was a cowboy who thought he would always be alone. He'd been told he could never have children, you see, and in those days that seemed like the end of any hope for a family. But then he came to McGill," Thomas prompted, knowing the story by heart. "That's right. He came to McGill, Nevada, looking for a fresh start. And in this little town, he heard about a widow woman with 5 children who needed help on her ranch." "That's Mama," Hannah exclaimed, as though this were a surprising revelation. "Yes, that's your Mama," Levi agreed, smiling at Delaney. "The most beautiful, strongest woman the cowboy had ever seen. She was trying to run a ranch all by herself while raising 5 wonderful children." "That's us," Joseph said to his twin, who rolled his eyes good-naturedly at the obvious statement. "So the cowboy went to work for the widow," Levi continued, thinking he'd stay just long enough to help her get the ranch back in order, but something unexpected happened. "He fell in love," Grace supplied dramatically, clasping her hands over her heart. "He did," Levi nodded. "With the widow, yes, but also with her children. He found himself thinking of them as his own family, even though he knew that wasn't possible. But Mama loved him too," Sarah added, her eyes soft with the romance of it. "She did," Delaney confirmed, reaching over to squeeze Levi's hand. "Even though she wasn't looking for love again, it found her anyway. And then they got married," Thomas said, "and the cowboy became our pa." "That's right," Levi agreed. And the cowboy, who had been told he could never have children of his own, suddenly had a ready-made family that he loved with all his heart. "But the story doesn't end there," Ethan reminded them, his voice deeper now, approaching manhood. "Tell the miracle part." Levi's eyes met Delaney's over the children's heads, sharing a moment of private remembrance. "The miracle," he continued, his voice softening, "was that sometimes doctors can be wrong. Sometimes the impossible becomes possible. And the cowboy and his new wife discovered they were going to have a baby together, a baby the cowboy had been told could never exist. "That's me," Thomas said proudly, puffing out his small chest. "That's you," Levi confirmed, ruffling his son's dark hair. "And then, 2 years later, along came your sister Hannah. And we became a family of 9, Delaney finished, her voice warm with contentment. 9 people who found each other when they needed each other most." A comfortable silence fell over the porch as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another further away. The evening star appeared, bright against the deepening blue of the sky. "I think that's the best story in the whole world," Grace declared finally. "It is a good story," Levi agreed, his arm tightening around Delaney. "But you know what makes it special?" "What?" Several voices asked at once. "It's true," he said simply, "every word of it. And it's still being written every day by all of us together." Later that night, with the children all in bed, Levi and Delaney stood together on the porch, looking out at the star-filled Nevada sky. Her head rested against his chest, his arms wrapped securely around her waist. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Delaney asked softly. "If you hadn't come to McGill that day," Levi considered the question. "Sometimes, but then I look at what we have and I can't imagine any other path. It's as if every hardship, every wrong turn, every disappointment was leading us to each other." Delaney turned in his arms to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "The infertile cowboy and the widow with 5 children," she murmured. "Who would have thought we'd find this kind of happiness?" "Together," Levi said, lowering his head to kiss her gently, "we found what neither thought possible." And in that moment, under the vast Nevada sky, surrounded by the home and family they had built together, both knew it was the simple truth. They had found in each other and in their children the greatest miracle of all, a love that defied expectations, healed old wounds, and created a future brighter than either had dared to dream.